balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 109. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. As an IBCLC, I have worked with thousands, yes, thousands of mothers and babies, teaching breastfeeding classes and meeting with moms, helping them overcome breastfeeding challenges. Join our Facebook group and chat with other moms who listen to this show and are interested in talking about breastfeeding. Just go to Facebook and search for the 4 words, All About Breastfeeding Community, and click on the Join button. See you there. My virtual breastfeeding mothers group was designed with you in mind. Pregnant and breastfeeding moms coming together once a week, virtually, and we meet with the same 10 moms each week. I facilitate this group to ensure that it flows nicely. We cover lots of topics related to newborn mothering and breastfeeding, and I make sure all the information given is accurate. My virtual group is what moms look forward to each week. It helps when you're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted. You're not sure about all the info you're being bombarded with, and it really helps you from feeling alone in your mothering life. To register, just go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/support. I look forward to seeing you in the group, which starts November 9th. Yikes, that is 2 weeks from now, so close. I have been so psyched this whole season, too. The guests have been amazing, and the FAQ Fridays have become incredibly popular. How did you like my interview with Jennifer Grayson, author of the new breastfeeding book, Unlatched? She was so much fun to hang out with, and I can't believe how fast our interview went. And Lisa Hendrickson-Jacks talks about her baby's tongue ties, and then we get into a discussion of her specialty, where she helps moms understand how to keep track of their monthly cycles for the purposes of overall health and conception as well as contraception. We were really just beginning to touch the surface, so I think I need to have her back on the show again, and it was another hugely popular show. Last week on our Tour of Breastfeeding show, we left off with the Bureau of Wet Nurses of the City of Paris and how wet nursing evolved in France from the 1700s to the 19th century. There is so much more to learn and talk about, so let's get started. Next country on our breastfeeding tour is England. Records show that the pattern of wealthy married women hiring wet nurses in France was quite the same in England also. Historians came to this conclusion based on the stark difference in birth rates between English upper and working class women. The wealthy women gave birth every year, and the working class women had longer intervals with births about every 3 years. While not 100% accurate, women who were wet nurses experienced a suppression in ovulation, which made wet nursing a relatively reliable contraceptive. I find this so interesting as the wealthier women, who should have enjoyed a healthier life, were not so healthy, largely because of the number of pregnancies and births they had, which were commonly between 12 and 18 pregnancies and births by the time they were less than 40 years old. These high number of pregnancies were really hard and taxing on their bodies. They spent a better part of married life pregnant, while the lower class women who were busy nursing babies and having fewer babies enjoyed a healthier life. Wet nurses were in high demand, and poor women were hired to wet nurse, where they were poorly paid, and the babies they were in charge of were sent to live with them in places far away from their biological mother. Many of these babies were not well cared for, and there was a high infant mortality rate. There are records of the babies not being looked after as well and fed nutritionally poor quality food, as we now know is called pap, which is a mixture of meat or rice broth and or flour, cow's milk, sugar, and water. Wealthier women employed wet nurses in their home and paid them very well. This way, they could keep them close, look after them, and ensure that they were actually being breastfed. Just as in France, for years this was an excellent job, wet nursing, as it paid really well. However, as much as I believe in wet nursing, I certainly would not be happy with these arrangements. Because of the financial rewards and probably also the good working conditions and living in nice homes, the wet nurses were more likely to abandon their own children for the financial rewards. Just as in France, the tides began to turn as the concern about syphilis being passed on to babies was heightened. The wet nurses also feared that the babies could infect them and spread it to other family members. These fears were the main cause of wet nursing greatly decreasing, and pretty soon was replaced with maternal breastfeeding, and slowly but surely, as time marched on, the increase of bottle feeding formula. As I continued my research, it was interesting to learn how the practice of wet nursing differed in Germany. In some regions, regardless of class, almost all babies were breastfed directly by their mothers, and in other areas, the practice was exactly the opposite, with babies being wet nursed or fed poor quality food called pap. This practice of feeding babies pap was also called dry nursing. Not surprisingly, it was determined that this method of infant feeding was a key player in the cause of the high infant mortality rates during this era. I learned a new word during my research, and I'm probably going to mess it up. It's German, Nichstillen, Nixtillen, which means never breastfeeding. Breastfeeding in Germany was least common in the south and southeastern regions and most common in the northwest and north and western regions. In some places, the practice of Nixtillen was practiced. Babies were fed pap instead of human milk, and breastfeeding mothers were openly threatened and ridiculed. This is quite unfortunate, as the rate of infant mortality were in the 50th percentile. Now, before you condemn people of these times, just think about how many women we hear stories about in modern times that are threatened when seen breastfeeding in public, are kicked out of places, and how many are ridiculed by others. As I continued my research, one common phrase kept coming to mind: the more things change, the more things stay the same. By the 18th century, as it became common knowledge in the medical community that wet nursed infants died in greater numbers than maternally breastfed babies, 18th century pediatricians united in their condemnation of the practice. It would still take many more years until their disapproval had much of an impact. Hamburg, a city populated by 90,000 at the time, continued to house almost 5,000 wet nurses. Wet nurses lived in the homes of the rich as well as the homes of merchants and artisans. By the late 19th century, German health officials, alarmed over the country's high infant mortality rate in comparison to other European countries, began to collect data on local infant feeding customs and their effects. All resulting studies showed a strong inverse relationship between maternal breastfeeding and infant mortality. This finding prompted an infant welfare movement whose varied facets all emphasized the benefits of maternal breastfeeding and the risks of feeding infants pap and wet nursing babies. Infant welfare centers, whose primary purpose was to encourage mothers to breastfeed their own babies, grew in numbers. Working mothers not only came to enjoy legal protection so they could stay home and nurse their babies, the state paid allowances to these mothers while they nursed their infants. By 1937, sharp regional differences in infant feeding had all but disappeared, and breastfeeding was becoming the norm in all areas of Germany. In Munich, for example, the percentage of breastfed infants rose from 14% in 1877 to 91% in 1933. This somewhat mirrors what happened in the United States, as breastfeeding then again fell out of favor and formula was said to be the best practice and the healthiest food for babies. And by the 1950s, most babies were formula fed. See how quickly the tide turns. It took another 65 years, and now in 2016, the breastfeeding rates are in the mid-80s. But the time spent breastfeeding is still way too short. Going back to Germany and the resurgence in the initiation of breastfeeding, this initiation rate was also accompanied by a reduction in the duration of breastfeeding. Women rarely breastfed their babies beyond the 12-week nursing allowance provided by the state. That phrase keeps coming back, ringing in my ears. The more things change, the more they stay the same. What I continually find so interesting is that breastfeeding and mothers and their decisions to do so or not are not so different now as they were years ago. It seemed that the culture you raised your children in, as well as the financial status of the parents, had more to do with what they fed their babies than what the mothers themselves desired, despite the health of their babies. It is not until a major influential organization comes in and changes the rules does society listen and follow. As high as the breastfeeding rates were in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they continued to decrease during the early 1900s to late 1900s. Initially, the medical organizations influenced parents by stating that formula was superior to human milk, and mothers were shamed into not breastfeeding, and there was little to no support. I cannot tell you, well, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know this. How many mothers have you heard tell me that they were either made to feel shamed and embarrassed and were told they would be a cow if they breastfed? Or the mothers share this story about their own mothers who were made to feel dirty and embarrassed if they dared show a desire to breastfeed. I am so disgusted at the strong influence that society has on mothers' decisions to breastfeed their babies. How many millions of babies have lost out on this most precious gift? How many mothers and babies have lost out on the health benefits of breastfeeding, largely because they were given wrong information and some were shamed into not breastfeeding? You can't see it right now, but my veins are looking like they are going to pop. Thank goodness that in the late 1900s, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the WHO, the World Health Organization, and other well-known organizations began endorsing human milk, disseminating studies of the health benefits of human milk, and began supporting, encouraging, and providing services to help support mothers and breastfeeding. In addition, the organizations are now taking it a few steps further and have begun studying human milk and the benefits of not only to the baby, but the health benefits to mothers who breastfeed. The rates are still piss poor, in my opinion, for the duration, and I won't keep harping on this until the changes are significant. I'm happy they're increasing and that more moms are breastfeeding. However, we still have a long way to go. Stay tuned for next week as we go and continue our tour of the world of breastfeeding. We're going to get into breastfeeding in other countries, in the United States. We're going to talk about things like, did slavery impact breastfeeding? The influence of culture on breastfeeding decisions by African American and white women. I am going to get into discussions about the politics of breastfeeding, the influence of physicians on breastfeeding, on formula feeding. We are going to talk about the impact the company Nestle has had on breastfeeding and many other factors that influence breastfeeding, such as co-sleeping, finances, and global impact on breastfeeding. Be sure to tune in next Wednesday for more on the tour of the world of breastfeeding. As always, I welcome your comments on the show. You can go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/contact and leave me an email, or you can click on the pink link that's on the right side of the page with a picture of a microphone there and leave me a voicemail, which I will happily read out loud on the next show. Until that time, bye-bye. Have you heard that Phoenix, Arizona is blessed with an amazing birthing center? Baby Moon Inn Birth Center is the best option for families who want access to midwifery care in and out of a hospital setting. You can experience birth in a comfortable home-like setting where natural birth is the focus. Laboring in water, being able to walk outside during labor, and enjoy the beautiful garden. This is what birth can be like for you. There is so much more to learn about Baby Moon. The staff would love to have the opportunity to meet you and would like to extend an invitation for you to attend a free Choices in Childbirth class and a tour of the birth center. All you need to do is call 602-314-7755. That's 602-314-7755 and ask for the tour dates. You can also go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast, and on the right-hand side of the page, you will see a link that will bring you to the calendar, and you can sign up for the tour yourself. When you come in for the tour, make sure that you tell them you found out about it from the All About Breastfeeding podcast, and you will be given a very lovely free gift.